Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa usalli wa usallam ala Sayyid al-awwaleen wal akhirin Nabiyyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa barik wa sallam. All praise are due to Allah, Lord of the worlds, and peace and best blessings be showered upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad, the master of the first and the last, and upon his family, his companions, and all those who call to his way and establish his sunnah to the day of judgment. As to what follows, my beloved brothers and sisters, to our friends, to our viewers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, this is another opportunity for us to reflect upon an extremely important aspect of Islam. And this historical experience that Muslims had in Morocco and Spain, North Africa, is one that is of critical importance to our history, and also can serve as an example for the future of Islam. But yet, it is not so well known. And that is part of what we are experiencing. We are in the month of February when this is being recorded, and this is Black History Month, and we recognize that Black History Month is an example of people who were erased from history, but yet played an extremely important role and are playing a role in the present. And so similarly, when we look at the issue of Al-Maghrib, Morocco and Spain, and what it means in history, you recognize that a lot of this history is not actually so well reported, but it is extremely important. And tonight we want to look at some very deep ideas. We'll be going over it in a general way, but those students of Islamic history, this is some of the most confusing but important aspects of our faith. And we recognize this issue in terms of Morocco and Spain. It came about with the World Cup, where the Moroccan team defeated the Spanish, they defeated the Portuguese, and there was such a response from the people, emotional response, and then from the whole Muslim world. And many people asked, like, why is this such a heavy response? It's just a football game, it's a soccer game. But there's something else in back of it. And the more you understand the history of this region, the more you will understand how emotional it was, even though it was symbolic for some victory for the Muslims in this World Cup game. And so to give ourselves perspective, and again, when we study history, we have to recognize that history is not just facts, figures, and names, but history is living experience. And so there is a flow to history. And to really understand what happened at a particular time, you need to understand something of the background. You need to understand something of the people who are involved. And one of the great historians, Ibn Khaldun, rahimahullah, who is considered the father of sociology and of many modern day subjects, he looked at history in a different way, not just as facts and figures, but he looked at the relationship that the people had with each other. And he looked at the flow of history, the rise of civilization, the fall of civilization. And so it's with this as a backdrop that we are taking a step slightly back to where we were. And this is around the year 711 AD. And North Africa had been, for the most part, taken over by the Muslims. The Amir of the Muslims was Musa bin Nusayr. And Musa bin Nusayr, rahimahullah, was the representative of the Umayyad Caliphate. And because his father had originally been a Christian, when the Muslim armies came into Syria and in the north, and he was taken as a prisoner, given to Khalid ibn al-Walid, rahimahullah, to be his servant. And Khalid noticed so much strength in this person that he completely freed this person, and he actually took him on as his right-hand man. And so Musa, the son of Nusayr, then grew up in this background of Islamic leadership, and he had a sensitivity about him. And so when the Umayyad dynasty, the empire, realized how important North Africa is, they sent Musa there to bring calm to the society. And that is because the original people of the society that we know as Amazigh, the Amaziran people, the Europeans call them Berbers, the Berbers, and that name somehow has stuck, but it's not actually their name. The Amazigh people have an ancient civilization, thousands of years old, and the land is fertile. The Sahara Desert region, southern Algeria, Libya, Morocco, Tunisia, the Great Sahara was once a tropical rainforest. And so under that soil, there are minerals, there are actually underwater lakes. There is so much that is actually there, but people don't know about this. You sort of look at the map and think it's just a desert and there's nothing really happening. Musa bin Nusayr, recognizing that Amazigh people, very strong people, they are courageous. And again, people were looking at the Moroccan players. And I say this because I'm not really a football fan in a sense. I don't watch soccer. But this case, the Moroccan spirit, and you saw the spirit of their players. And when they won the game, they went to their mother and they kissed her hand. And, you know, the way the people were, there's something about that spirit. That is Amazigh. Okay, and you'll see me focusing on Amazigh because reality is this is an African people. This is North Africa. And again, we don't look at our history in terms of race or tribe, but it is important to recognize this because this will round out our understanding of different nationalities and ethnic groups within Islam. So Musa bin Nusayr came into the area, and instead of just trying to dominate the people of the region, he opened up the doors for equality. He gave upward mobility. He had education. And so the Amazigh people saw that this person cares about us. He cares about the land. And they started to come into Islam in large numbers. And they became the backbone of the Muslims empire all across North Africa. They became the backbone for one of the most important sections of the Islamic world. Across the water, as we have learned, was the Iberian Peninsula. And that is now known as Portugal and Spain. This had been settled in ancient times by a European people from the north, some called Celtics, and then Germanic peoples, one group called Vandals. They were called Vandals. And Vandals are very important people, very strong. They resisted the Council of Nicaea. They did not accept the Trinity. They believed in one God. And they gave the Romans such a difficult time that they even demonized their name, the same way they're demonizing different racial groups. And they said, Vandal, if I were to say to you that this masjid was vandalized last night, does anybody know what that means? This masjid was vandalized. Have you ever heard that before? Destroyed, robbed, vandalized. That's the name of a people, right? So you see how they will name people and give, just like when you call people Berbers, barbarians. You're calling them savages. You see? That is a way of controlling people. And that's happening today with names that are being used against Muslims to try to demonize our cultures. You see it in India. You see it in Palestine. You'll see it in many places where Muslims are being demonized in order to set the stage for genocide and destruction. So this is a perfect example of this, the Vandal people. After their time, another Gothic people, there were Gothic people coming from the Germanic types. And the most important was the Visigoths. And the Visigoths came into the region of Spain and Portugal, Iberian Peninsula. It's a beautiful part of the world. The climate is really moderate. The soil is fertile. It's a beautiful place. And so it was a place that people wanted to conquer. They wanted to be in charge of it because, it had so much to offer. And the Visigoths took over. They were believers in one God, and then a group of them became Trinitarians. And the Trinitarian group, backed by the Roman Empire, dominated the region in the time of Musa bin Nusayr. Also, quiet as it's kept, there was a group of Jewish people who had come to the Iberian Peninsula in 586 BC. BC. With the fall of Jerusalem, Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians, a group of the tribes of Israel migrated and they landed in the Iberian Peninsula, and they actually lived there for centuries. So there was a sizable population of monotheists that were living here in the Iberian Peninsula. And one of them, Ilian, who was the ruler of Ceuta, which, as we learned, was a little section on the tip, right on the tip there, if you can follow my arrow, right on the tip of Morocco, where Gibraltar is. It's a place called Ceuta, in Arabic, Sebta. And you'll see Ceuta and Melilla being mentioned even today because there's problems with refugees, because it's Spanish territory. It's not Morocco. So you got to have a Spanish visa to get into Ceuta, right at the tip. And in those days, they were Christians and they accepted Muslim rule. So they said, we will submit to you, we pay jizya, we will pay the tax for non-Muslims. So the Muslims accepted them. And it went back and forth, but with military power in the 20th century, the Spanish kept control of the area of Ceuta. So one of their leaders, Ilian, sent his daughter to be educated in Toledo. That was the educational capital of Spain. And the Visigothic ruler, Roderick, found out about this, and he violated the girl, and he disgraced their family, and Ilian wanted revenge. So he asked Musa to send the armies across. Musa refused because he had plenty of territory, and Musa was what you could call a consolidator. He's the kind of leader that's a consolidator. You have initiators and consolidators. And you'll find this throughout history. Even in our own Muslim communities, this is a problem. You have some brothers or sisters, they initiate everything. They have charisma, they're good speakers, they move all around, but they can't stay still. So they start the programs, but they can't consolidate the programs. This is a personality type. Okay. Then you have other people who are consolidators. They're very stable. They can keep things going, but they don't have charisma. So if you establish a program with consolidators and you come back 5 years later, it'll be the same program. Now that's good because they kept it, but they didn't develop. You see? So you have initiators and consolidators. Uqba ibn Nafi', who originally went across the Tabi'i, he was initiator. Right? Musa was consolidator. So Musa needed an initiator to go into Spain to face the Visigoths. And he chose his governor, Tariq ibn Ziyad, who was Amazigh. He was of the local population as an African, right? Berber, Amazigh, could speak Arabic, tireless leader. And Tariq ibn Ziyad, as we found out in a previous class, was able to go across the straits and face an army of over 100,000 Christian Trinitarians. And he had about 11,000 with reinforcement, about 17. And so 17,000 to 100,000. But for Muslims in those days, that was about even. Because the iman of the Muslims was so strong that they believed more in Allah than they did of anything else. And Tariq decisively defeated the Visigoths. And then, following this, and the mountain where he landed, of course, is Jebel Tariq, the mountain of Tariq, that you now call Gibraltar, right, which is an Arabic word. Okay, so now Musa then went across and he met up with Tariq, and they entered into Spain. Everywhere they went, the people opened up their gates because each city had a wall. So they opened up their gates because they realized they were not forcing people to be Muslim. They were not, they were taking off the taxes. They were monotheistic. So they literally, within the space of like 2 years, they went through the whole of Spain, all the way to France, was controlled by Muslims in that short period of time. And what happened following this is that this Iberian Peninsula, and it's a little bit higher even than what's on your picture, it goes right up to the top. The Iberian Peninsula became one of the new opened areas for Muslims. But the leadership came from either Qayrawan, that was the capital, western capital of Islam in Tunisia, right? Or Damascus. That's where the Umayyads were, right? They didn't have leaders, and that's too far away. You can't make decisions by Pony Express. There's no bird that can fly all the way to Damascus. So therefore, there started to be cracks in the society, some tribal divisions. And tribalism, of course, is one of our big problems as human beings and the Muslim world. Ethnicity and tribe. Okay? And so the land there became known as Al-Andalus, which there are many different discussions, but the strongest position is that it comes from Vandals, the land of the Vandals, Vandalusia, pronounced Andalusia, and then in Arabicized Al-Andalus. It's the land of the Vandals. Now, after 40 years like this, it stayed 40 years. And there were Amazigh people, there were Arabs who had come across. Amongst the Arabs, there were Yemenis, okay, who were original southern Arabs, whether from Hadramaut or from Yemen. There was also what they call Shami, that's Syrians. And there was also Arabs from the Arabian Peninsula, and especially in the leadership was one called the Fihri, which is Quraysh. There were elite Arabs that were there. And one branch of Quraysh called Banu Fihr, right? That's one in the line of, so the Fihri people, they were dominating. And so there are cracks, people struggling for power there. And Musa and Tariq were called back to Damascus for political reasons. And so there was no leadership. This sets the stage. Something had to happen. If there was no leadership in Al-Andalus, it would have ended up being a tribal fight and squabble, finished. They would eventually would have lost. The Christians would have united themselves, come back, and took the territory. So this set the stage for a major event, which is so important that the whole of the history of Al-Andalus, which goes 781 years, right, from 711 to 1492, that's 781 years that Muslims were a dominant force in Spain and Portugal in Al-Andalus. This event that happened, this next period of time, set the stage for the whole of the presence of the Muslims in Al-Andalus. And to understand it, we have to go back a little bit. And it's a sensitive area, but again, I want you to understand history as a flow, right? If you take chop history, you're not going to fully understand what happened, right? If you can start piecing together Islamic history, then it starts to make sense, right? Because before you just see a bunch of kings here and there and whatever, rulers, but you need to be able to piece it together. So going back to the time of Uthman ibn Affan, radiallahu anh, the great Sahabi, A lot of people don't recognize the fact that Uthman was Umayyad. He was from Banu Umayyah. And Banu Umayyah, you remember the big tribes in Mecca? There was the Hashimi side, and from the Hashim side, came Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and there was the Umayyad side of Quraysh. And they were sort of the power forces in Mecca. And the representative of the Umayyads in the time of Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was Abu Sufyan. You've heard of him before, Abu Sufyan, right? So they were the Umayyads. The Umayyads were known more for their political power, their military power. Hashemites had the spirituality, and they had the love of the people, and they had knowledge and charisma. So these were the leading forces. So after the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam passed away, leadership was taken by Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anh. He was Quraysh, but from a different group. And then later by Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anh. He was Quraysh, but another section of Quraysh, like 7 major sections. And then finally, the Shura of the Muslims chose as the third Khalifa to be Uthman. And Uthman was Umayyad. Now, Umayyads were a power force in Mecca, right? Remember. And Hashemites were the other power force. And so people have this jahiliyyah in them. People have a tribe, you have a certain part of town, a certain ethnicity. So now an Umayyad was in power. But Uthman was the 4th person to accept Islam. He was the scribe of the Prophet ﷺ. He was one of the 10 people promised paradise before their death. Right? He gave so much money. He married 2 daughters of the Prophet ﷺ. One had passed away. No person in history ever did that before. So Uthman was a beautiful person, a beloved person. And he continued the policies of the previous Khalifas, and that was, establishing justice and having balance, expanding Islam. He kept the organization that Umar had set up, right? But one of the things about Uthman that really stands out is the fact that because Islam was spreading so fast, there were different people who were making up versions of the Quran. And so he gathered together the Quran readers, the Qurra, and they had the written scrolls kept in the house of Hafsa, radiallahu anha, the daughter of Umar. And they put together the text agreed upon, the Uthmani, so it's called the Musaf al-Uthmani, and they sent it to the main capitals of Islam. So that is the main text of the Quran itself. Okay, and so this really prevented a lot of confusion and a lot of disagreements. But even so, there is a thing called fitna. Fitna. And fitna, whose plural is fitan, is temptation, trial, sedition, civil strife, conflict. It can mean affliction, punishment. Fitna is used a lot of ways. But fitna is used in the Quran in places it says fitna ashaddu min al-qatl, that fitna is worse than being killed in some cases because it's confusion. Okay? And this type of fitna we're talking about is the sedition, the civil war that goes on between people. The companions of the Prophet ﷺ, they were human beings. Islam was spreading fast. So there was a lot of wealth flowing into the cities. They suddenly had all this wealth and power. Also, there's tribalism. There's Umayyads, Hashemites, there's Arabs, non-Arabs. This is a reality. Okay? And many of the early Sahaba died. Time was going by. So they didn't have the original feeling of Islam. And so the fitna begins. And Imam al-Tabari, who wrote a famous history book, and others, recognized the presence of Abdullah ibn Saba, who was a Jewish man from Yemen. And he had an idea. He wanted to destroy Islam. And he came in and started saying things like Ali is like God is in him, and saying wild things. He was rejected by people in Medina, Mecca, Iraq, Syria. He found followers in Egypt. Okay, so these are the followers of Ibn Saba. And they wanted to cause confusion. And they came into Medina disguised as Hujjaj, like they're making Hajj. Okay? But the word came out about them. Now, Uthman was such a gentle, humble person, loving person. He said, I want no fighting in Medina. Even though we know these people are like conspirators, right? Ali and the rest, they said, give them to us. But Uthman said, no blood in Medina. Okay? He wanted to protect the city. But it's a long story. You can go back to our previous class that we did on sex and cults in Islam. We went in details on this. And Uthman eventually was killed by the followers of Ibn Saba and other seditionists. He was shaheed. He was reading the Quran, and his blood dropped on the Quran itself. And it landed on Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 137. But Allah will suffice you against them. And He is all hearing and all knowing. And during the struggle, his wife, who was trying to protect him, they chopped off her finger. And this Quran was eventually sent to Damascus and the finger of Naila. Okay, and the Umayyads had based themselves in Syria. So Syria was the place where the Umayyad family moved to. And the leading person in the Umayyad family was Muawiyah. Right? And Muawiyah, radiallahu anh, he was one of the scribes of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay, and famous Sahabi. And so when after the death, he said the first thing we should do is find the killers of Uthman. Number one, the leading Muslims gathered together. Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anh was one of the most prominent people. And they decided Ali's position, their shura position was, you must first have a Khalifa, because one night should not go by without a leader of the Muslim world. So they chose Ali as the Khalifa. Muawiyah disagreed with this. And so this is even Aisha, radiallahu anh, she disagreed. Now, not violently, but she disagreed. She didn't, and there's a lot of reasons. We don't have time to explain tonight. But understand the flow of this. This is a fitna now. So you have two sides. They're both Muslim, right? And they're disagreeing with each other. When these sides are meeting with each other, Ibn Saba's people, they infiltrated both sides and tried to make them fight because they wanted the confusion. And the reality is, the Quran does say in Surah Al-Hujurat, if two parties of the believers happen to fight, make peace between them. But then if one of them transgresses against the other, fight the one that transgresses until it reverts to Allah's command. If it does revert, make peace between them with justice and be equitable, for Allah loves the equitable. So there is proof that if there's confusion maker amongst the Muslims and they won't stop, you have to oppose them. So this was the famous Battle of Siffin. Okay, and during these times, Battle of Siffin, major groups, struggling. Prophet ﷺ said the hour will not begin until two great groups fight one another, and there will be a great battle between them, and although their call is one. Okay, so we agree that this is the time. Scholars agree that it is. So it was Ali versus Muawiyah. These are the leaders of the group. And Ali wanted to end the whole thing and say, okay, you fight me, and then no other Muslim dies. But Muawiyah was not ready to fight Ali. Ali's like a lion. So he was not ready to face Ali. And the battles, they started fighting each other. And when Ali's forces were prevailing, they took Muawiyah's group, took the pages of the Quran, put it on their spear. And when the other Muslims saw it, they stopped fighting. And they said, okay, now we have to arbitrate. So there must be, this is madness. So they stopped. Let the Quran decide. Okay, that's what it was. And they got together. It was indecisive. Ali's side really had the advantage, and it wasn't a decisive coming together. The problem wasn't completely solved, and a group of Muslims broke away from the whole group, lost control of their minds, like some of our Muslims today, and they started to attack everybody. And this group was called Khawarij. And we studied this in our previous session in details. The Khawarij sent out assassins for Ali and Muawiyah and Amr ibn al-As, who was the leader of the Muslims coming out of Damascus and going into Egypt. But the only one who succeeded, the assassin, was the one, Abdullah ibn Muljam. He stabbed Ali, and Ali then passed away. So this is the Khawarij. Okay, but Ali had defeated the Khawarij decisively. So really, they were scattered all around and just making confusion. Okay, so okay, this could have been before that side. Sorry, Ali, then defeated them. We said the arbitration didn't work, but Ali passed away. And when Ali was on his deathbed, they came to him and they said, "Your son Al-Hassan, do you want him to be the Khalifa?" That's natural because he was the more prominent of the two. It was Hassan and Hussein, right? So he said, "What about your son Hassan?" Ali said, "I don't say yes and I don't say no." See, he has intelligence. If he said yes, he would have turned the Khilafat to a kingdom because it was his son. You get it? He said, "I don't say yes or no." But they chose Al-Hassan because he was very pious and very intelligent. And the Prophet ﷺ had taken Al-Hassan and put him on his knee when Hassan was young and said, "You will one day make peace between two great armies." This prediction. Al-Hassan took the leadership and he said, "No more fighting. I will give the authority to Muawiyah's side." He's a Sahabi. There's Sahabas that are there. No fighting. And so with that, Muawiyah then became the valid Khalifa of the Muslim world. Okay? And that's the beginning of what is called the Umayyad dynasty. Okay? I'm doing this so you understand this Umayyad term, right? If you understand the whole flow, now it's going to make sense now when we start talking about our story. He united the Ummah. And they called the year he took over the year of the Jama'ah because he calmed everything down. And even Al-Hussein at that time, he had conditions, but he went to Medina. He didn't struggle. The Muslims were basically united at that time. Okay, and naval bases were constructed in Sicily. Muslims even tried to take Constantinople. So many things were happening. The Muslim world was, in a good condition. But the mistake that Muawiyah made, he's a great person. Okay, and like I say, great leader, one of the writers. But his problem was he trusted his son. His son was Yazid. And Yazid, according to most reports, had a bad character. Some even say he drank alcohol. And Muawiyah appointed Yazid as his successor. This is a major mistake. So the majority of the scholars disagree with what happened here. This is his major problem. There's a whole detailed story about Al-Hussein, radiallahu anhu, who disagreed with Yazid taking over. He was eventually killed in Karbala, right, in Iraq, right? And that started, a group of people, first political and then ideological, that are known as the Shia. Okay, so this is how that division came about. What we're looking at is the fact that the Umayyad dynasty, they were expanding Islam. They were doing a lot of things, but at the same time, they had serious flaws. They had serious problems. Number one, the way they were handling differences with force. Secondly, they tended to be what you could call an Arab-centered group. Their base was in Syria. Okay, and the leadership of Islam mainly were Arabic-speaking people, but Islam was spreading rapidly. It was spreading fast in all directions. Thousands of people were accepting Islam, right? And so, really, the majority of people in a short time were not Arabs, right? But the aristocrats, the more knowledgeable people, were the Arabs, especially in Damascus, and a revolution started taking place, which means like an overthrow. And there's a lot of reasons for this overthrow. There were so many different groups involved. There were many Ajami people, non-Arabs, who felt that they weren't being treated right. There was also another group within the Quraysh called the Abbasids, and they are the children of Abbas, the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ. His name is Abbas. So they were Quraysh too. Okay? And they began this revolt. Okay? And there was discontent. Also, and again, it's a deep story, but you remember there were members of the family of the Prophet ﷺ who were around, direct members. And there were some people who supported them as Ahlul Bayt. It wasn't the Shia that you know today, because at that time, everybody was Sunnah. Everybody prayed the same. There was no difference in their prayers and their ideology, anything. Only that Ahlul Bayt. So some people wanted somebody from the close family of the Prophet ﷺ to take over the leadership. Others wanted Abbasids. Others wanted Persians. Others wanted different groups were there. And the Umayyads united, the Abbasids united them under their leadership. Okay, and this is how this revolution came about, and with a lot of discontent. And unfortunately, the Abbasids, because Umayyads were so harsh in how they dealt with people, they decided to wipe out every Umayyad on earth. Okay? Wipe them out. Then we won't have a problem with people fighting us, this struggle between ruling parties. And so they began to exterminate any Umayyad they could find. Everybody. And at this point, this is where an individual comes in who is the main subject of our discussion tonight. His name is Abdurrahman ibn Muawiyah. Now, this is not Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, the one, the Muawiyah in the beginning. No, it's a common name amongst Umayyads. His lineage was Abdurrahman ibn Muawiyah ibn Hisham, ibn Abdul Malik, ibn al-Hakam. So this is another strain of the Umayyads. Okay, so it's just the name Muawiyah. So he was, by virtue of, his connection, he would be the grandson of the Khalifa. The Khalifa at that time was Hisham. But look at the point now. Remember our discussion. Abdurrahman was born in Palmyra, which is right near Damascus, Syria, heartland of the Umayyad Caliphate. His father was Muawiyah ibn Hisham, and his mother, Raha, was Amazigh. Look at this now. She was a North African. There's the part that nobody knows. Africans, again, pushed to the side, right? But playing such an important role. She was Amazigh. And her clan, the Nazfa tribe, was a well-known tribe near in Tunisia by the desert. Okay, and so she was the mother. So he was half Arab. His father was, coming from Hisham. He was in the royal family, but he was Amazigh. Okay? And at the time of the revolt, he was about 20 years old. Now, this story of Abdurrahman, this is the kind of stories that our children should be watching. Many of us are watching the Resurrection, Ertugrul, and things like that, what's happened to Ottomans. This story here is such an epic journey Even Antonio Banderas, the famous Spanish actor. He's a very famous Spanish actor. He wanted to play Abdurrahman in a movie, right? He made bids to. He wanted to be, because he's from Malaga, which is in Spain, southern Spain. So this story is an amazing story. Okay, and he's around 20 years old. His family is being killed everywhere. And so he and a few of his family members, they left Damascus. His brother Yahya, his 4-year-old son Suleiman, some of his sisters, and his freedman, his client, which is now his servant, but now freed, is a Greek person named Badr, who had accepted Islam. They left and they fled toward the Euphrates River. Okay, so the Abbasids are everywhere. And the Abbasids are known for the black flag, and they wear black clothing. So this is how the Abbasids, and they were killing Umayyads everywhere. It's a long, deep story. They fled to the Euphrates, and there was so much danger because the horsemen are trying to get them all along the way. And eventually, um, his sisters and his son, they had to hide them, and the only ones that was left was himself and his brother Yahya going across the Tigris and Euphrates, the Euphrates. The Abbasids are on the other side, and he's swimming in the water with his brother. And they called out to them and they said, "No, come back. We will give you sanctuary. It's okay." And his brother got weak. And he said, "Yeah, this river's really heavy. Maybe, see," he said, "Don't go back." His brother went back, and as soon as he reached the shore, they took off his head. Abdurrahman continued. He made it to the other side, and he went through traveling distances, Syria, up, down, and then into Egypt. He comes together with Bedr, his servant friend, and he's traveling. The 20-year-old man traveling, and he has to hide. He can never say who he is, so he's hiding himself until finally he reaches North Africa. And when he reaches, and then he reveals, his identity as Amazigh. And so the indigenous people recognize him, and they take him, and he reaches Qayrawan, and he actually, he's taken care of by the Nafza clan. And from there, he then speaks with the scholars in Qayrawan, and word is sent across. Remember Spain and Portugal's confusion now, right? People fighting each other. They need a leader. Okay, and Abdurrahman, then, this is how the story goes. You see him traveling all the way across, and then he makes it there. Abdurrahman, he reaches Spain. Okay, he comes in, he announces himself, and immediately the Amazigh people in Spain rally behind him. Yemenis too, these are Yemenis here. The Yemenis also rally behind him. The elite of the Fahrids, Banu Fihr, they're like the Arab elites at the time. They didn't like him because they're afraid of him because he's Umayyad. Remember, he's one left of the dynasty. The Umayyads ruled the whole Muslim world. They had conquered North Africa. They had entered into Spain. It was all under Umayyads. And he was the only one left of the Umayyads. So he had to consolidate his power. And it took him some time. You can read about it. But he was, an initiator. See, what's special about Abdurrahman is he was an initiator and a consolidator. Now, you really find a person who's got both qualities. Sometimes you get somebody, but it's rare. Usually your organization will have good speaker, good initiator, and then you have your consolidators who keep everything going. But sometimes you get somebody who's both, and he was both. So he consolidated power against the Fihrids and all the different groups, and he basically took control, of the area in Al-Andalus. Now, just as he's trying to get himself together, there's an army coming out of North Africa. And it was sent by who? The Abbasids. Remember the Abbasids, right? The word got to them that there's an Umayyad who's in Spain now. So they sent somebody against him, but Abdurrahman was cunning leader, and he annihilated them. And when the leader of the Abbasids, Al-Mansur, when the word got back to him, he was making Hajj at the time, and the word got back to him, and they said, what should we do now? And he said, leave him alone. He is Saqa Quraysh. He is the falcon of Quraysh. So his name was given by an Abbasid, the Khalifa, because he hated him, but he admired him. Okay? Because this man and a falcon, this bird, Arabs love the falcon. Many people do. If you go into people's folklore, the falcon is courageous, the falcon has wisdom. There's so many things in the falcons. So Saqa Quraysh. And that's the name that many people, use with him. And the scholars said, Lola Abdurrahman lantahal Islam fil Andalus. They say if it was not for Abdurrahman, Islam would have been finished in Al-Andalus. It would have been finished if it was not for this man. And another name that they give him, they call him Abdurrahman al-Dakhil. Dakhala means to enter. And the ulama said, Awal man dakhala Qurtaba min Bani Umayya Hakiman. The first of Banu Umayya to enter the city of Cordoba, right? As a leader was Abdurrahman. So they call him Abdurrahman al-Dakhil. So he's an Umayyad who goes into Al-Andalus. So you hear that name mentioned about Abdurrahman also, Abdurrahman al-Dakhil. And one of the first things that he did was that, he established Cordoba as his capital. And Cordoba is sort of in the center of Spain. And it's got a very dry climate. If you go to Cordoba, before some of us have gone on the journeys to Spain together, and it's like Saudi Arabia or something. Like it's really hot and dry. It's got that kind of climate. And he felt at home there. And it's very central location also on the Guadalquivir River. Very central location. And it was the site of an ancient Roman temple. And so Abdurrahman came in and they started using the temple for their prayers. And the Christians had taken over the temple and made it a cathedral. So Christians were praying there, and Muslims were also praying there. So that is what is called Al-Jamia. And what he did was, he negotiated with the Christians, and he purchased the cathedral for 100,000 gold dinars. That's a lot of money. That today might even be millions, I don't know, billions, like millions of dollars. That was. He purchased it from the Christians, you see? So that was the kind of relationship he had with Christians. So forget this Islamist fundamentalist mentality. He purchased the building. One of the first things that he did was that he rebuilt the Roman aqueducts. Aqueducts bring water. The Romans at one point were there, and they built canals. So he refurbished the canals, and he put them all over the place. Even you could go down streets and into your house. Now, what was he doing by that? He's bringing in water, purity. This man is his mind. This is consolidation. You see, many leaders today in the Muslim world, other places, you want to consolidate power, so you put the soldiers all over the place and you terrorize everybody. No. What he does, he works for the benefit of the people. He works for the benefit of society. This is what a real Muslim leader is supposed to be. And this is why, I believe he's one of the best examples of what our leaders should actually be like. Okay? And He built public baths. He built bridges, roads. See what he's doing with the roads and the bridges. He's now making transportation, movement around. Water is flowing in his city. He lifted the tax, unjust taxes. You just pay your zakat. Christians, Jews pay your jizya. No extra taxes. And he fed the poor people. And it is said that he would go amongst the people, not dressed in regular clothes. He might even cover his face. And he would go and make Fajr prayer. And he'd go amongst the people and he would feed poor people. He was like that kind of a person, right? Very humble person he could be, right? He went through a lot. Look what he went through in his life. So he was humble, but at the same time, he was a serious general. When he fought his enemy, they said he was ruthless, actually. He was a serious fighter. So he combined both of this. And another thing he did, which I believe is a really important point, is that he encouraged education. And he had madrasas. He let Muslims, Jews, and Christians free education. All children were allowed to have reading, writing, mathematics. For the Muslims, they could go on to they had their Quran, they go on to Islamic studies. The Jews were even allowed to study the Torah, whatever, but free education. So look what he's doing as a leader. Think about some of our leaders who buy giant yachts and buy, Mona Lisa pictures and all these other things. You see what he's doing? He encourages skills, development, trades. So he encouraged pottery making, glass blowing, paper making. It was Muslims who introduced paper into Europe. Muslims. They had no paper in England, France, any of the places. Muslim introduced it. It came from China, and it also came from Egypt, papyrus, right? But the Muslims were the ones that introduced it into Europe. Cordoba was one of the centers of introduction of paper. What does that do? Literacy. Writing, right? Look what he's doing. He also encourages weaving. And it's a deep move that a lot of people might overlook, but I take it serious. He actually encouraged guilds, unions, weavers' union, potter's union. In other words, how do people get their rights from the government? If you're just by yourself, you're individual. But if you're a union, you're serious. And so he encouraged unions. And they say that that's one of the reasons why the Ottoman Empire lasted so long. Because they had the Alps, they had the military fighters, and they had the scholars, and they had what they call Ahi Guild. The Ahi Guild were the business people, and they formed a guild. So the three worked together. So when you do this thing with the guilds and whatnot, you are actually encouraging economic progress, right, in your society. So this is amazing what he's doing. And another important aspect, he did not compel anybody to accept Islam. There was no compulsion in religion. So therefore, he allowed people could continue on. But Muslims, because of it was a natural thing. The Muslims were shining at that time. But he said, we're not going to force anybody. Okay, we want to build the society. They call this now convivencia. There's a term in Spain that they use now, convivencia. And convivencia is where different religions and groups learn to live, they work in cooperation. It's called convivencia. So you recognize another person's religion and you can work for the benefit of society. He started this. Okay, so when you do this, Islamic society then rises. This is when Islam is at its heights, because we're studying the rise of Islam in Al-Andalus. Okay? Now, what else did he do? He encouraged agriculture. He actually had Muslim scientists who came from different countries because a lot of people wanted to go to Al-Andalus. It became a really important place. And we have some famous scholars, from Qurtuba, Qurtubi, the Tafsir Qurtubi. He's from Cordoba. Many scholars were from there. The Maliki school of thought was basically North Africa and Spain. Okay, so he had scientists come in and they studied Iberian Peninsula. What are the best um, plants that can grow in this environment? And you had some places which is kind of tropical, a lot of rain or whatever. Other places more mountainous. Generally it's like a Mediterranean. So he encouraged especially citrus fruits. And up until today, the oranges and tangerines that come from Spain and North Africa are some of the best in the world. Even the word, and there's different opinions, but even I found one opinion, and I was teaching some, Portuguese students once. We were doing a Dawa program, and I said, like, where'd your name Portugal come from? They said, we don't know. But I said, what do you think about oranges? I said, the word for orange is bortaqal. Bortaqal is orange. So Portugal, is the land of oranges, because that was probably the most successful fruit. Peaches, apricots, pomegranates. Pomegranate. That beautiful Ruman, right? That pomegranate. But you know what that is in how they describe it there? It's pum de Granada. Pum de Granada. It's the apple of Granada. Pum is French, right? Pum de Granada, the apple of Granada is pomegranate. Because the pomegranates in Granada, Spain, were some of the best in the world. Up until today, if you go to Spain, you'll see their symbol in Granada. They use the pomegranate. It's like their symbol. He encouraged cotton. Remember, they're weaving and all that. Now they're going to grow. They're self-sufficient, man. They're growing their own cotton. They're weaving their own wools. Right? Rice, sugarcane, date palms. They brought them from North Africa, planted date palms. Right? And so by doing this, he was developing self-sufficiency. So they were not dependent upon any other country. As a matter of fact, they started exporting to other people. And they actually became one of the economic centers of Europe as time went by. And you will see later that in the golden age of Islam that we'll be covering soon, there in Cordoba, it took Spain and it took Paris and London 700 years to reach the level that they reached. Okay? It starts with him, with Abdullah. Okay? He also put emphasis on trade and the port of Lisbon. Does anybody know where Lisbon is? Which country is Lisbon? Portugal. See, you sort of think Portugal's different than Spain. It was all one country before. So Lisbon was one of the best ports for the Muslims. Also Malaga. Malaga's on Costa del Sol. That's on your coast, right? Spanish coast, Malaga. Okay, so he encouraged all of these things. And it was a natural thing that developed. And because of this, what happens out of this is that the Muslim presence, Muslims live a simple, uncomplicated, industrious lifestyle. Now, when I say simple, I don't mean ignorant, but it's very straightforward. Their lives are very clear. Their families are clear. They get a good, nice trade. They work that trade. They have apprentices for their sons or their daughters, whatever. They're industrious. They're always working. They're making their salat. They're not drunk all the time and eating swine. And so therefore, the other people got influenced by this because it was natural spread of Islam. This is one of the best ways of dawah. People talk about dawah. The best way to do outreach of Islam is not debates. You need a debate sometimes if you have a troublemaker. But a debate is not. The best way is Islamic lifestyle. People see it and they want it. You see? So this is what they were doing there with this natural lifestyle that was developed this industrious way. And there's a movie, a documentary, and I'll give you you can watch it tonight if you want, it's interesting. It's done by a British journalist. Her name is Bettany Hughes. Bettany, Bettany, Hughes, Hughes. And it's called When the Moors Ruled in Spain or in Europe. Okay, but you can Bettany Hughes. It's right online. She's a famous British journalist. And it's amazing because this is not like a Muslim trying to push Islamic history. This is a British journalist. But what she found out was some amazing things. What they found out scientifically, that when Islam had spread to the masses of the people, there was not millions of Muslims pouring in from North Africa and the Middle East. No. It is the population of the people who are actually embracing Islam. So the majority of Muslims at the height of Islam in Spain, the majority of Muslims would have been, according to their DNA, Europeans. Not Arabs, not Persians, not Africans. They were Europeans who had embraced Islam. Okay? Because remember, the Vandals were there before, and there were other people who were believers in one God. Okay? But one of the worst things that happened, and we might touch it either this semester or the next semester, one of the worst things that happened when the Spanish finally did take over is that they call the Muslims the Moors. And the Moors, Moors, Mores means somebody, a person of color, a colored person. So they say you're a bunch of colored people. Okay? And so they're not even saying Arab or Berber, they're saying you're a bunch of colored people. And they say, if you read Spanish history, they say the Moors came over and they took over Spain and they destroyed, and then we took it back. That's how they describe it. But 781 years is a long time. How old is the United States? It's only 1776. How old is Canada, right? A couple hundred years old. 781 years is a long time to be in a place, right? But they wiped out the traces of Islam. And we'll study that as we go on further. We'll show you what happened. They wiped it out to when they did in the 60s, they did a census of Muslims, and they basically said 0. There's no Muslims in Spain. And the most ignorant people about Islam and Islamic history in Spain were Spanish, because they would not allow it in their education. You see? Same way like in the United States now, they have this big argument about critical race theory, and they don't want African history, the true history of slavery, and the wiping out of the First Nations. They don't want that in the history book. They want just Columbus is a good guy, and they're saying the African people came over, they were immigrants. They're trying to say they're immigrants. And they actually did good. They raised their lifestyle, their standard of living. That's what they want to put in their history, especially Texas, right? And so this is what the Spanish set the pace for this, right? By wiping out history completely. But you watch this documentary of Bettany Hughes, you'll be shocked at what you see, happen there in Spain. So I want to open up the floor for any questions anybody may have. We covered a lot of ground, but this time we're going to go a little bit deeper than in the past into this. So you really see, what is a Moroccan, North African, what is Spanish, what is their relationship, what does it actually mean? Because it's something very, very serious, right? It's very serious. So I want to open up the floor for any questions that anybody may have concerning what we covered so far tonight. Floor is open. And online, we're going to look and see if there are any questions.
The cathedral brought by Abdurrahman, now it's a church, no?
Yeah, so we'll be studying later on what happened. It became one of the largest Jami masjids in the Muslim world, in Cordoba. It became very famous. But when they took over, they were conquering the cities. And when they came to Cordoba, the king, ignorant guy, he wanted to destroy it. But the people came out, not Muslims, and they said, don't destroy this building because you'll never be able to make it again. So they left it, but what they did was they put a cathedral in the middle of it. So when you go there, you'll see the arches, and you'll see, I'm going to show you some pictures how it looks like. You'll see the arches and the different things, but the cathedral part of it's in the middle. But it is officially a cathedral. You can't make salat inside of there. No Jumu'ah. You can't. It's officially a cathedral. Yeah. Any questions anybody has so far?
Is there a sign of revival of Islam actually there?
Yes, that's another thing we're going to see. But alhamdulillah, in the past few decades, there have been a lot of Muslims coming in from North Africa to work, especially in Barcelona and places like this. Even one of the World Cup players, Hakimi, one of the best guys, he was born in Spain. And his mother, he's Moroccan, but he was born in Spain. And so he plays for the Moroccan team, you see. So there's a lot of, but then also, alhamdulillah, there are Spanish people who are actually embracing Islam. This is in the past 20 years, especially the last 10 years. It's unbelievable. And I've been in Jumu'ahs there in Granada, and you have almost every week Spanish people embracing Islam. And you'll see the story. We're going to weave the story for you so you can see how this could come about. But there's hope. If there's hope here, there's hope anywhere. But you first must understand the rise of Islam. That's what we first must understand. And then we're going to understand the fall. And what's different about Spain is there's another rise, and there's another fall, and there's another rise, and there's another fall. So we're going to look at all of these, this movement of a circle. And it gives you some principles of when Islam is healthy and when it's unhealthy. You can judge yourself, you can judge Muslim societies, and see when it's healthy and when it's unhealthy. Question?
Question: when the Umayyads were being killed, what was happening in North Africa at that time? Like when the confusion was happening in the Andalusian area.
Yeah.
How was the situation in North Africa?
Well, North Africa was controlled by the Umayyads. But the Umayyad people themselves who were there were not large in number. They were like the main officials. So there were other types of Arabs, and then there was Amazigh, and there were other people who were in the administrations and whatnot. So nothing happened there. There was no army that attacked them. But, in the center of Islam, which was Damascus and Iraq, this is where this change went about. And they didn't necessarily accept it. But eventually, when the whole of Spain, the whole of Iraq and all that changed, they said, okay, the Abbasids now, they have wiped out the Umayyads, they're the Khalifa. So we're not going to fight them, they're the Khalifa. And the way you can tell is that on Jumu'ah, when you do a Jumu'ah prayer in a classical Muslim masjid, and you make dua, you're supposed to make dua for the Khalifa. That's supposed to be in your dua. We don't have any Khalifas in Toronto. We don't have, we're on the peripheries. And in some Muslim countries, they still do that. I was in Malaysia once. They asked me to do the Jumu'ah, at the university. It's a big classical masjid. And they gave me this paper. And they said, put this at the end, the second khutbah. And I had to read it, where I was asking Allah to protect the sultan of the area. And I had to mention his name, make a dua for the sultan. So they decided to change. But one of the points that came is that Abdurrahman, he never declared himself to be a Khalifa. But what he did say, this is like an emirate of the Umayyad dynasty. Now, his brother, his other people, eventually, his son actually made it there to Spain, his son, Suleiman. he made it. And some other people in his family made it there. Anything left of the Umayyads went to Spain. And his brother actually, one of his brothers said to him, you should erase the Abbasid name in the Juma and put Umayyad. Okay? But there's no real proof that he did that. He never considered himself to be the Khalifa. You're going to see later, it's Abdurrahman III, Abdurrahman al-Nasir li-Dinillah. He declared he was the Khalifa. And we're going to show you how that happened next week, inshallah. Question.
Online. The Canary Islands have many Muslims. Are some of these the descendants of Muslims who ran away for refuge during the Inquisition period?
Yes, all over the region there. There were millions of Muslims who actually were expelled, from that region, and they went to the Canaries and they went to North Africa. Some of them landed in Egypt. Some of them landed in Ottoman Turkey. They were all over the place. And in the islands of the Mediterranean, at one point, the Muslims controlled the whole Mediterranean. And islands like Sicily, Sicilia, was controlled by the Muslims. Malta, much of these islands in the region were controlled. But a long time went by. And so if you did the DNA of the people of the Canary Islands and Sicily, you would find probably some Arab, Amazigh blood, if you did their DNA. But because of Christian domination, crusaders coming in, world wars, it's completely Christianized. But if you did the DNA, you would probably find, North African, Arab lineage, in their families.
There's another question.
Yeah.
Are there any books you would suggest us to improve our studies?
Yeah. I want to give you a list of books, maybe, at some point. If you can find, there's a person by the name of S.E. al-Jazairi. So what I want to do is, maybe next time, is to make an actual slide with these names. S.E. al-Jazairi. He has a couple of books.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
So the name S.E. Al-Jazairi is the French spelling Al-Djazari. Al-Jazairi. He's an Algerian. DJ. A Short History of Islam. He has a couple books. There's also Islam in Al-Andalus, Ahmed Thompson. Next week, inshallah, I'll give you, more names that you can follow. Any Arabic-speaking people in Bi'ath al-Islam fil Andalus, Ali Katani is a good book. But I'll give you some books next week. But Al-Jazairi and Ahmed Thompson, if you can start with them. But in conclusion, one of the important points that we're making tonight that a lot of people don't realize. Remember Morocco and Spain, and right? Abdullah Dakhil, he is from North Africa. He's Amazigh. That's the same spirit. When those Moroccans defeated the Portuguese and Ronaldo, and they defeated the Spanish, and nobody could believe it, the fighting spirit that they had, and they give their money to the poor. It's an unbelievable spirit that they have. That's the blood that they're carrying. And people they are misunderstood people. Their story is untold, but they are very important people in Islamic history. And we're going to see more in this history of Spain, how important the Amazigh, the North Africans, actually are to the history of Islam. So I leave you with these thoughts, and I ask Allah to have mercy on me and you. Wa akhir da'wana, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.